The rifle crack echoed across the valley like thunder, and Nathan Jimenez dropped from his saddle before the sound reached him. Lisa Mitchell worked the bolt with practiced precision, brass casing spinning through the morning air as she tracked the second rider. Eric Torres was already wheeling his horse toward the tree line, but she had calculated his path 3 heartbeats ago. The Winchester spoke again, and Torres pitched forward, clutching at his shoulder as his mount carried him into the pines. From her position on the ridge, Lisa could see the entire valley spread below like a tactical map. Smoke still rose from the charred remains of her barn, the structure she had built with her own hands after Samuel died. The horses she had spent years training were scattered or dead. Her ranch, her sanctuary, her carefully constructed life of quiet solitude lay in ruins. But Nathan Jimenez and his men had made one critical error. They had assumed that a widow living alone in the Montana Territory was helpless. Lisa Mitchell had not always been a rancher. Before she came to this valley, before she took Samuel's name and learned to gentle horses instead of hunting men, she had been someone else entirely. Someone the Army had called Ghost Walker. Someone who could track a whisper through stone and put a bullet through a silver dollar at 400 yards. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you are watching from and hype this video in the comments. This is about to get very interesting. She lowered the rifle and began her descent from the ridge, moving through the scattered boulders with the fluid grace of someone who had learned to read terrain like scripture. Below, she could hear Eric Torres crashing through the underbrush, his wounded shoulder making him clumsy. Nathan Jimenez lay motionless beside his horse, the clean shot through his thigh having severed the femoral artery. He would bleed out in minutes without medical attention. Lisa had given them fair warning. They had chosen not to listen. 6 months earlier, the morning had started like any other in the valley. Lisa Mitchell rose before dawn, as was her custom, and stepped onto the porch of the cabin Samuel had built for her before the consumption took him. The air carried the bite of early winter, and frost painted silver patterns on the grass. She pulled her coat tighter and walked toward the corral where her horses waited for their morning grain. The horses were her pride and her livelihood. Samuel had left her the land and the cabin, but the horses were her own creation. She had a gift for reading their spirits, for finding the patience to work with even the most difficult animals. Word had spread through the territory that Lisa Mitchell could gentle any horse, and ranchers traveled hundreds of miles to bring their problem animals to her. She moved among the horses with quiet confidence, running her hands along their necks, checking for cuts or swelling. Each animal received individual attention, a practice that had earned their trust and respect. The big black stallion she called Thunder nickered softly as she approached. He had been her most challenging project, a wild Mustang that had fought captivity with desperate fury until she showed him that partnership was possible. Thunder was also worth more than the rest of her herd combined. His bloodlines were impeccable, his spirit unbroken despite his training. She'd already received inquiries from buyers as far away as California, but she was not ready to part with him. Thunder represented something more than money to her. He was proof that even the wildest things could choose to trust again. As she filled the water troughs, Lisa noticed something that made her pause. The lock on the feed room door was scratched around the keyhole, tiny metal filings that caught the morning light. Someone had been here during the night, someone who did not know how to pick a lock properly, but had managed the job anyway. She knelt beside the door and studied the ground. 3 sets of boot prints in the soft earth, one set noticeably smaller than the others. Lisa straightened and let her gaze sweep the valley. The nearest neighbor was 15 miles away, and the road to town wound through 30 miles of rough country. Visitors did not arrive by accident in this remote place. Someone had come looking for something specific. She completed her morning routine with extra attention to detail, noting anything else that seemed out of place. The horses were agitated, their ears pricked forward as they tested the wind for unfamiliar scents. Thunder paced along the fence line, his muscles tense beneath his glossy coat. Animals knew when predators had passed through their territory. Lisa returned to the cabin and prepared breakfast with methodical care. She had learned long ago that maintaining normal routines was essential when danger lurked nearby. Panic led to mistakes, and mistakes led to death. She ate her eggs and bacon slowly, thinking through the possibilities. Rustlers were common enough in the territory, but they usually targeted cattle, not horses. Horse thieves were a different breed entirely, more desperate and more dangerous. After breakfast, she walked to the small shed behind the cabin where she kept her tools. To any observer, she would appear to be selecting items for the day's work. In reality, she was checking the hiding place Samuel had never known about. Behind a loose board in the wall, wrapped in oiled leather, lay the tools of her former trade. The Colt revolver with its worn grip, the badge she had carried for 7 years, and the letters that proved Lisa Mitchell had once been someone else entirely. She had been Deputy United States Marshal Elizabeth Kane, one of only 3 women to hold that position in the territories. She had tracked killers through blizzards and desert heat, brought order to lawless towns, and earned a reputation that made hardened criminals surrender rather than face her in a fight. But that life had ended the day she met Samuel Mitchell, a gentle man who saw past her reputation to the woman beneath. Elizabeth Kane had died the day she married Samuel. Lisa Mitchell had been born in her place, a woman who wanted nothing more than to raise horses and live quietly in a beautiful valley. For 5 years, that life had been enough. Even after Samuel died, she had maintained the fiction, honoring his memory by remaining the woman he had loved. But someone had been in her feed room last night, and the horses were restless. Lisa rewrapped the gun and badge and returned them to their hiding place. She was not ready to resurrect Elizabeth Kane, not yet, but she would be prepared if that choice was taken from her. The riders came at noon, 3 men on horseback approaching from the South Trail. Lisa watched them from her kitchen window as she cleaned the dishes from her midday meal. They rode with the casual arrogance of men who believed they owned whatever they could take. Their horses lathered from hard riding, despite the cold weather. The leader was a big man with a carefully groomed beard and expensive clothes that marked him as someone with money and authority. The other 2 were clearly hired guns, their coats bulging with concealed weapons. They reined up in front of her cabin and dismounted without invitation, leaving their horses ground-tied in her yard. Lisa dried her hands on her apron and stepped onto the porch. The leader touched the brim of his hat in a mockery of politeness. "My name is Nathan Jimenez," he said. "I represent certain business interests in the territory. We need to discuss your horses." Lisa kept her hands visible and her voice level. "My horses are not for sale, Mr. Jimenez." Nathan smiled, but the expression held no warmth. "Everything is for sale, Mrs. Mitchell. It is just a matter of agreeing on the right price." The 2 gunmen had spread out slightly, positioning themselves to cover different angles. Lisa noted their movements without appearing to watch them. Professional placement, but they were overconfident. They saw a woman alone and assumed she represented no threat. "I am not interested in selling," she repeated. "I would appreciate it if you would leave my property." Nathan's smile faded. "I'm afraid you misunderstand the situation, Mrs. Mitchell. We are not here to negotiate. We are here to inform you of a decision that has already been made. That black stallion of yours has caught the attention of some very important people. They want him, and they are prepared to take him." Lisa felt something cold settle in her stomach, but her voice remained steady. "And if I refuse, then you will discover that accidents happen frequently to people who live alone in remote places," Nathan said. "Fires, for instance. Barns burn so easily, and sometimes the flames spread to houses. Very tragic." One of the gunmen, a thin man with nervous eyes, shifted his weight from foot to foot. "Boss, maybe we should just take the horse and go. This place gives me the creeps." Nathan silenced him with a look. "We are being civilized about this, Mrs. Mitchell. You have until tomorrow at sunset to reconsider. After that, we will take what we came for. And you may not survive the experience." Lisa met his gaze without flinching. "You are making a mistake, Mr. Jimenez. Some things should not be taken. That horse is one of them." Nathan laughed, a harsh sound that startled his own horses. "What is a woman alone going to do to stop us? You think you can handle all of us?" "No," Lisa said quietly. "I think you should leave before this gets complicated." The 3 men remounted and rode away, but their laughter carried on the wind. Lisa remained on the porch until they disappeared over the ridge, then walked to the corral where Thunder waited. The stallion approached the fence and lowered his head so she could stroke his neck. "I am sorry, boy," she whispered. "I tried to keep the past buried, but it seems the past has found us anyway." That evening, Lisa sat at her kitchen table and wrote 2 letters. The first was addressed to her neighbor, 15 miles away, asking him to care for her remaining horses if anything happened to her. The second was much shorter, containing only an address and the words, "The wolf runs tonight." She rode to town through the darkness, her mare picking her way carefully along the moonlit trail. The telegraph office was closed, but the operator lived above his shop, and Lisa knew he would open for the right price. Both messages were sent before midnight, one by regular mail and the other by telegraph to an address in Denver. On the ride home, Lisa allowed herself to remember things she had spent years trying to forget. The weight of a badge on her chest, the feel of a gun in her hand, the satisfaction of bringing killers to justice. She had been good at that life, perhaps too good. The reputation of Marshal Elizabeth Kane had grown until it overshadowed the woman who carried it. Samuel had offered her a different kind of strength, the strength to choose peace over violence, to build instead of hunt. She had embraced that choice completely, burying Elizabeth Kane so deeply that sometimes she almost forgot she had ever existed. But Nathan Jimenez had threatened her home, her horses, her carefully constructed life. He had made the mistake of believing that a widow was helpless, that a woman living alone could be intimidated into submission. Tomorrow, he would learn the truth. Lisa woke before dawn and dressed in clothes she had not worn for years. Dark wool pants instead of skirts, a heavy coat that concealed her movements, boots designed for silence rather than the style. She braided her hair tightly and pinned it beneath a wide-brimmed hat that would shadow her face. In the shed behind the cabin, she moved the loose board and unwrapped her former life. The Colt revolver felt familiar in her hand despite the years of disuse. She checked the action, loaded 6 rounds, and holstered the weapon beneath her coat. The badge went into her shirt pocket, a talisman of authority she hoped she would not need to use. But it was the third item that truly marked her transformation. A leather-bound journal filled with names, descriptions, and locations. The accumulated intelligence of 7 years tracking the worst criminals in the territories. Some of the men in that journal were dead, others imprisoned, but a few had escaped justice and disappeared into the lawless regions beyond civilization. Nathan Jimenez was not in her journal, but men like him were. She recognized the type, the arrogance, the assumption that money and violence could solve any problem. Such men always made the same mistake. They believed their own mythology until reality educated them otherwise. Lisa saddled her mare and rode toward the high ridge that overlooked the valley. The position offered excellent visibility and multiple escape routes. Lessons learned in harder times when survival depended on thinking 3 moves ahead. She picketed the mare in a sheltered grove and climbed the final 100 yards on foot, moving with the silent precision of someone who had stalked human prey through hostile territory. From the ridge, she could see her entire ranch spread below. The cabin where she had known happiness with Samuel, the corral where Thunder paced restlessly, the barn that housed her tools and feed. All of it threatened by men who saw only profit in her careful work. The morning passed slowly. Lisa remained motionless in her concealment, a skill that had served her well when tracking killers who might be tracking her in return. Patience was the hunter's greatest weapon, more valuable than speed or strength. She had learned to wait like a stone, to become part of the landscape until her quarry revealed itself. At midday, dust rose on the southern trail. 4 riders this time instead of 3, Nathan Jimenez having recruited additional help for what he assumed would be a simple theft. Lisa studied them through the field glasses she had retrieved from her hidden cache. 3 of the men she recognized from the previous day, but the 4th was new. Older, more careful in his movements, probably the real professional among them. They approached her ranch with casual confidence, dismounting near the corral where Thunder waited. The stallion snorted and backed away from the fence, his instincts warning him of danger. Nathan Jimenez pointed at the horse and spoke to his companions, gesturing broadly as he outlined his plan. Lisa could not hear the words from her position on the ridge, but she could read the body language. Nathan was issuing orders, dividing responsibilities, preparing for what he assumed would be a simple matter of overwhelming a helpless woman. The new man, the professional, stood slightly apart and studied the surrounding terrain with the careful attention of someone who understood the tactical situation. That one would be dangerous. Lisa made a mental note to eliminate him first when the time came. The 4 men spent an hour at her ranch examining the horses, testing the strength of the corral fence, making preparations for the theft they planned to commit at sunset. They showed no concern for concealment, no awareness that they might be observed. In their minds, They were dealing with a frightened widow who would either surrender or die. Finally, they remounted and rode back toward town, leaving her property unguarded. Lisa remained in position for another hour, ensuring they were truly gone before beginning her own preparations. When she was satisfied that she was alone, she descended from the ridge and returned to her ranch. The afternoon was spent in careful preparation. Lisa moved through her property with the methodical thoroughness of someone planning a military operation. She noted sight lines, cover positions, and escape routes. She identified choke points where attackers could be funneled into killing zones. Most importantly, she prepared contingencies for multiple scenarios. If Nathan Jimenez came with 4 men, she would engage from the ridge and use superior position to even the odds. If he brought more, she would fall back to secondary positions and force them to hunt her through terrain she knew better than her own heartbeat. If they tried to burn her out, she would make them pay a price that would haunt their survivors. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Lisa took position on the ridge with her rifle and settled in to wait. The Winchester was an old friend, its action smooth from years of careful maintenance. She had used this weapon to bring down killers from distances they never imagined possible. Tonight, it would serve that purpose once again. Thunder whinnied from the corral below, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. The stallion knew that violence was coming. Animals always knew. They came with the sunset, 5 riders silhouetted against the orange sky. Nathan Jimenez had recruited another gun, probably sensing that his original plan might encounter complications. Lisa watched them approach through her rifle scope, identifying each man and assessing his capabilities. Nathan rode in the center, still playing the role of civilized businessman despite the weapons his men carried openly. To his left was Eric Torres, the nervous gunman from the previous day, his hand never straying far from his pistol. On the right rode Gary Morris, a thick-set man with the scarred hands of someone who solved problems with violence. The professional she had noted earlier, Philip Howard, hung back slightly, his experienced eyes scanning the terrain for signs of ambush. The 5th man was a surprise. Young, perhaps 20, with the eager cruelty of someone trying to prove his worth to older killers. Such men were often the most dangerous because they had nothing to lose and everything to prove. The riders reined up 50 yards from her cabin and dismounted in a loose line. Nathan Jimenez stepped forward and called out in a voice that carried across the valley, "Mrs. Mitchell, your time is up. Send out the horse and we will leave you in peace." Lisa remained silent on her ridge, the rifle steady in her hands. Let them wonder where she was. Let them worry about what they could not see. Fear was a weapon, and she intended to use every advantage available. "We know you are here," Nathan continued. "Your horse is in the corral, and there is smoke from your chimney. Do not make this harder than it needs to be." Still no response from the cabin. Lisa could see Philip Howard speaking quietly to Nathan, pointing toward the high ground where she had positioned herself. The professional had spotted the tactical weakness in their approach, but Nathan was too arrogant to listen to advice. Gary Morris drew his pistol and fired 3 shots into the air, the reports echoing off the valley walls. "Enough games," he shouted. "Come out now or we burn everything." Lisa centered her crosshairs on Gary Morris and squeezed the trigger. The Winchester cracked like thunder, and Morris spun sideways, clutching his shoulder as his pistol flew from nerveless fingers. Before the others could react, she had worked the bolt and acquired her second target. Eric Torres was already moving, his nervous energy finally finding an outlet as he sprinted toward the cabin. Lisa led him slightly, compensating for his movement and the distance, then fired again. Torres stumbled and fell, rolling behind a water trough that would provide minimal cover. Nathan Jimenez and his remaining men scattered, seeking shelter behind their horses and the few scattered boulders near the cabin. Philip Howard had his rifle out and was scanning the ridgeline, trying to locate her muzzle flash. The young gunman crouched behind a horse and fired wildly toward the high ground, his shots going wide by dozens of yards. From her concealed position, Lisa had the advantage of elevation, cover, and superior marksmanship. But 5 men, even reduced to 3 effective fighters, represented a serious threat if they could organize a coordinated assault. She needed to reduce their numbers further before they adapted to the situation. Philip Howard was the key. He was directing the others, trying to establish fields of fire and coordinate their response. Lisa shifted her aim and waited for him to expose himself. Professional or not, he would have to move eventually. Her patience was rewarded when Philip Howard rose from cover to signal the young gunman. Lisa's shot took him center mass, the heavy rifle bullet dropping him instantly. The coordinated response collapsed as Nathan Jimenez found himself in command of a situation he did not understand. The young gunman panicked and broke from cover, running toward his horse in a desperate attempt to escape. Lisa let him go. A frightened survivor would spread word of what had happened here, and fear was more valuable than another corpse. Nathan Jimenez and Eric Torres remained, both wounded and pinned down by her superior position. Lisa called out across the valley, her voice carrying the authority of her former badge. Nathan Jimenez, you came to steal my horse and threaten my home. Now 2 of your men are dead and 2 more are wounded. I suggest you reconsider your position. Who are you? Nathan shouted back. No ranch woman shoots like that. Lisa Mitchell died the day you threatened what was mine. Lisa replied, you are dealing with someone else now. She could see Nathan and Eric Torres conferring behind their meager cover, trying to decide whether to surrender or continue fighting. The decision was made for them when Eric Torres attempted to flank her position, crawling through the brush toward the base of the ridge. Lisa tracked his movement and put a round into the ground 6 inches from his head. The message was clear. She could have killed him easily, but chose to demonstrate restraint. Eric Torres froze where he lay, no longer willing to test her marksmanship. Your last man just gave up, Lisa called to Nathan. You are alone now, and I have all night to wait. Make your choice. Nathan Jimenez emerged from cover with his hands raised, his expensive clothes torn and stained with the blood of his wounded companions. Lisa kept him covered as she descended from the ridge, moving carefully through the scattered boulders that provided concealment. Her rifle remained trained on his center mass, ready to fire at the first sign of treachery. I surrender, Nathan called out. Do not shoot. I am unarmed. Lisa approached to within 20 yards and stopped, maintaining enough distance to react if he attempted anything desperate. In the fading light, she could see the fear in his eyes, the dawning realization that he had made a catastrophic error in judgment. You came here to steal my horse, she said. You threatened to burn my home and kill me if I resisted. Now your men are dead or wounded, and you are at my mercy. Tell me why I should let you live. Nathan licked his lips nervously. I was hired to acquire the horse. I do not even know who wants it. This was just business, nothing personal. Everything is personal when you threaten someone's home, Lisa replied. Who hired you? A man in Denver, goes by the name of Jose Smith, but that is probably not his real name. He paid me $500 to bring him the black stallion, no questions asked. Lisa felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Jose Smith was a name from her past, a killer she had hunted for 3 years without success. He had murdered a federal judge and his family in Colorado, then vanished into the lawless territories where even federal marshals feared to follow. If Jose Smith wanted thunder, it was not for the horse's bloodlines or training. It was because he had discovered the connection between the stallion and the woman who owned him. Somehow he had learned that Lisa Mitchell had once been Marshal Elizabeth Kane. Describe this, Jose Smith, she ordered. Nathan's description matched the man in her journal exactly. Medium height, dark hair going gray at the temples, scar across his left cheek from a knife fight in El Paso. Jose Smith had found her, and thunder was just the bait to draw her into the open. Where is he now, she asked. Denver, last I heard. But he moves around a lot, never stays in one place more than a few days. Lisa considered her options. She could kill Nathan Jimenez and dispose of the body, eliminating a witness to the night's events. She could turn him over to the territorial authorities, though justice was uncertain in these remote regions. Or she could send him back to Jose Smith with a message. You are going to ride back to Denver, she said finally. You are going to tell Jose Smith that his plan failed. Tell him that Marshal Elizabeth Kane is not dead, and she remembers what he did to Judge Harrison and his family. Nathan's eyes widened as he recognized the name. Elizabeth Kane was a legend in the territories, a ghost story told around campfires to frighten young criminals. The idea that this ranchwoman was the famous Marshal seemed impossible, but the evidence lay scattered around him in the form of dead and wounded men. He will kill me for failing, Nathan whispered. Then you had better make sure he understands the alternative, Lisa replied. If he wants to finish what he started 7 years ago, he knows where to find me. but next time he should come himself instead of sending amateurs. She gestured toward the wounded men with her rifle barrel. Take your casualties and go. If I see you in this valley again, I will not be so generous. Nathan helped Eric Torres to his feet and half-carried him toward the horses. Gary Morris was conscious but badly wounded, requiring assistance to mount his horse. Philip Howard was beyond help, his body already growing cold in the mountain air. As the survivors prepared to leave, Nathan turned back toward Lisa. Why did you let us live? Because dead men cannot deliver messages, she replied. And because I am not the same person I was 7 years ago, I choose my kills more carefully now. The three wounded men rode away into the darkness, leaving Lisa alone with her thoughts and her memories. Thunder nickered softly from his corral, sensing that the immediate danger had passed. But Lisa knew this was only the beginning. Jose Smith had found her, and he would not give up easily. The man she had hunted for 3 years was now hunting her, and he had the advantage of choosing when and where to strike. She had won this battle through superior position and marksmanship, but the war was just beginning. Lisa walked to her cabin and lit the oil lamps, then sat at her kitchen table with her journal open before her. Jose Smith's page contained everything she had learned about him during their years of cat and mouse. His habits, his associates, his methods of operation. She had been close to catching him twice, but each time he had slipped away like smoke. Now he had made the mistake of coming to her territory, threatening her home and her carefully constructed life. Marshal Elizabeth Kane had failed to bring him to justice 7 years ago. But Lisa Mitchell had advantages the Marshal had never possessed. She knew this land like her own heartbeat, and she had allies Jose Smith could not imagine. The telegram arrived 3 days later, delivered by a rider who had pushed his horse hard through the mountain passes. Lisa read the message twice before burning it in her kitchen stove, but the words were already burned into her memory. Package delivered. Expect company within the week. Old friends remember old debts. Signed V. Victoria Reyes was coming, and she was not coming alone. Lisa had served with Victoria during the worst years of the Apache Wars, when federal marshals worked in teams to survive the brutal conditions of the southwestern territories. Victoria had been her partner, her backup, her closest friend in a profession that offered little friendship. After the incident that ended Elizabeth Kane's career, Victoria had been the only one to visit Lisa in her self-imposed exile. She had understood the choice to disappear, to become someone else in a place where the past could not follow, but she had also made it clear that the debt between them remained unpaid. Lisa spent the next 2 days preparing for siege. She moved her remaining horses to a hidden canyon 5 miles from the ranch, accessible only through a narrow trail that could be easily defended. She cached weapons and supplies at strategic points throughout the valley, creating a network of fallback positions that would allow her to fight a running battle if necessary. Most importantly, she sent Thunder away. The stallion was too valuable and too recognizable to risk in the coming confrontation. A trusted neighbor agreed to hide the horse until the danger passed, asking no questions about the circumstances. On the third day, Victoria Reyes arrived with 2 companions Lisa recognized from the old days. Janet Ortiz had been a tracker for the Army before joining the Marshal Service, capable of following a trail across solid rock. Jessica Reed was a former Pinkerton agent whose skill with explosives had saved their lives on more than one occasion. The 4 women met in Lisa's kitchen like old soldiers planning a campaign. Maps were spread across the table, positions marked, contingencies discussed. They had worked together before, and the old rhythms came back easily despite the years that had passed. Jose Smith is in the territory, Victoria reported. He brought 12 men with him, all professionals. They are camped in the ruins of the old mining settlement at Copper Creek, about 30 miles south of here. Lisa nodded. She knew the place, a ghost town abandoned when the silver played out 5 years earlier. The remaining buildings would provide good cover and multiple escape routes, exactly the sort of place a man like Jose Smith would choose for a base of operations. He knows you are here, Janet added. That fool Jimenez told him everything before Jose put a bullet in his head. He knows about the ranch, about your horses, about the life you built here. Then he knows I will not run. Lisa said, this is my home now. If he wants to finish what he started, he will have to come and take it. Jessica Reed studied the topographical map with the eye of someone who understood the tactical possibilities. This valley is a natural fortress if we use it right. 3 ways in, all of them through narrow passes that can be controlled with minimal force. The question is whether we fight defensively or take the battle to him. Lisa considered the options. Jose Smith expected her to run or hide, to behave like the fugitive she had been 7 years ago. He would not expect a direct assault on his position, especially not from 4 women against 12 professional killers. We go to him, she decided. Tonight, while he thinks we are still planning our defense, hit them hard and fast, then disappear before they can organize a response. Victoria smiled, the expression transforming her weathered features, just like the old days. In and out before they know what hit them. The plan was simple in concept but complex in execution. They would approach Copper Creek from 4 different directions, using the abandoned mine shafts and ore processing buildings to mask their movements. Jessica Reed would create diversions with her explosives, drawing attention away from the main assault. Janet Ortiz would eliminate sentries and cut off escape routes. Victoria Reyes would provide covering fire from the high ground. Lisa would go after Jose Smith personally. 7 years of unfinished business demanded a personal resolution. As darkness fell over the valley, the 4 women prepared for war. They checked their weapons, synchronized their pocket watches, and reviewed the signals they would use to coordinate their attack. Each woman carried enough ammunition for a sustained firefight, but the plan depended on speed and surprise rather than overwhelming firepower. Before they departed, Victoria pulled Lisa aside for a private conversation. "You do not have to do this," she said quietly. "We could take you away from here, help you disappear again. Start fresh somewhere he will never find you." Lisa shook her head. "I tried running once. It did not work. Jose Smith will keep coming until one of us is dead, and I would rather choose the time and place for that confrontation. And if you die tonight, then at least I die as myself," Lisa replied, "not as some frightened woman hiding in the mountains." The abandoned mining settlement of Copper Creek lay in a narrow valley between 2 ridges, its skeletal buildings casting long shadows in the moonlight. Lisa approached from the north, moving through the scattered tailings and rusted machinery that marked the graveyard of industrial ambition. The settlement had died when the silver ran out, leaving behind empty buildings and broken dreams. Jose Smith had chosen his position well. The main building, a former assay office, commanded views of all 3 approaches to the settlement. Sentries were posted at strategic points, and Lisa could see the glow of cigarettes marking their positions. 12 men, Victoria had said, all professionals who knew their business. But professionals could become overconfident, especially when they believed they held all the advantages. Jose Smith expected to face a frightened woman defending her ranch, not a coordinated assault by trained federal agents. Lisa checked her pocket watch. 2 minutes until the diversions began. She used the time to study the layout one final time, identifying cover positions and escape routes. The plan was good, but plans rarely survive contact with the enemy. Success would depend on adaptation and the skills they had learned in harder times. Jessica Reed's first explosion shattered the night silence. A blast that brought down the old mine head frame in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. Shouts erupted from the settlement as men scrambled to respond to the apparent accident. A second explosion followed, this one in the ore processing building, creating the impression of a structural collapse rather than an attack. Lisa used the confusion to advance, slipping between the buildings like a shadow. She could hear Jose Smith shouting orders, trying to organize his men and determine what was happening. His voice carried the authority of command, but also the edge of uncertainty that came with unexpected developments. Janet Ortiz struck next, her rifle speaking from the eastern ridge. One of the sentries dropped without a sound, his cigarette still glowing as it fell from lifeless fingers. A second sentry turned toward the sound and died before he could raise an alarm. Janet was doing her job, eliminating the outer perimeter with the silent efficiency of a born hunter. Victoria's covering fire began as Lisa reached the edge of the main compound. Her rifle cracked steadily from the western ridge, forcing Jose Smith's men to take cover and disrupting their attempts to organize a response. The shots were carefully placed, designed to suppress rather than kill, but the psychological effect was devastating. Lisa reached the back of the assay office and paused to listen. Inside, she could hear Jose Smith cursing as he tried to make sense of the coordinated assault. He had expected to be the hunter, not the hunted, and the reversal was clearly rattling his composure. She found a window that had lost its glass years earlier and slipped inside, her Colt drawn and ready. The interior was lit by oil lamps, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Jose Smith stood near a table covered with maps and papers, a rifle in his hands as he peered through the front windows. He was older than she remembered, his dark hair now heavily streaked with gray. The scar on his left cheek had faded but was still visible, a reminder of the knife fight that had nearly ended his career before it began. He moved with the careful economy of a man who understood violence, but there was tension in his shoulders that spoke of strain. "Hello, Jose," Lisa said quietly. He spun towards her voice, the rifle coming up in a smooth motion. But Lisa had anticipated the movement, and her Colt was already trained on his center mass. For a moment, they faced each other across the lamplit room, two killers separated by 7 years of unfinished business. "Elizabeth Kane," Jose said finally, "I wondered when you would come out of hiding." "I never hid," Lisa replied. "I just chose a different life. You made the mistake of threatening it." Jose smiled, but his eyes remained cold and calculating. "You killed Judge Harrison's murderer, did you? I seem to remember you failing to catch me despite 3 years of trying." "I was constrained by law then," Lisa said. "Tonight, I am not." Outside, the battle continued. Jessica Reed's explosions had given way to sustained gunfire as Jose's men tried to locate and eliminate the attackers. But they were fighting shadows, professionals who knew how to use darkness and terrain to their advantage. "So what now?" Jose asked. "You shoot me down in cold blood." "That does not sound like the righteous Marshall Kane I remember." "Marshall Kane believed in justice through law," Lisa replied. "Lisa Mitchell believes in justice through action. Judge Harrison's family deserved better than what you gave them." Jose's finger tightened on his rifle trigger, but Lisa was faster. Her shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his weapon clattering across the floor. He stumbled against the wall, clutching the wound as blood seeped between his fingers. "That was for the judge," Lisa said, advancing into the room. "This is for his wife." Her second shot shattered his left kneecap, dropping him to the floor with a scream of pain. Jose tried to crawl toward a fallen pistol, but Lisa kicked it away before he could reach it. "And this is for their children." The third shot was carefully placed, designed to cause maximum pain without immediate death. Jose writhed on the floor, his face pale with shock and blood loss. Lisa stood over him, the smoking Colt steady in her hand. "You have maybe 10 minutes before you bleed out," she said. "Enough time to think about what you did to that family. Enough time to understand that justice delayed is not justice denied." Lisa left Jose Smith to die alone in the lamplight and slipped back into the night. The battle was winding down, the surviving members of his gang either dead or fleeing into the darkness. Victoria's rifle had fallen silent, and Jessica's explosions had given way to the crackle of flames as several buildings caught fire. She made her way to the predetermined rendezvous point, a cluster of boulders on the eastern ridge where they had agreed to meet after the assault. Janet Ortiz was already there, her rifle across her knees as she watched the settlement burn below. "Clean sweep on the perimeter," Janet reported. 5 sentries down, no alarms raised. Victoria arrived minutes later, moving with the careful gait of someone who had been in sustained combat. Her rifle was slung across her back, and there was satisfaction in her weathered features. 8 confirmed kills from Overwatch," she said. "The rest scattered when the building started burning. They will not be back." Jessica Reed was the last to arrive, her clothes singed from proximity to her own explosives. She carried a canvas bag filled with papers and maps recovered from the burning buildings. "Intelligence Hall," she announced. "Names, addresses, bank accounts." Jose Smith was not just a killer, he was running a network of criminals throughout the territories. "This information will put a lot of bad men in prison." Lisa nodded, but her attention was focused on the burning settlement below. Jose Smith was dead, the debt finally paid after 7 years. But his death would not bring back Judge Harrison or his family. Justice was a cold comfort when weighed against the lives that had been lost. "Is it finished?" Victoria asked quietly. "For Jose Smith, yes," Lisa replied. "But there will be others. There always are." The 4 women made their way back through the mountains as dawn broke over the eastern peaks. They traveled in silence, each lost in her own thoughts about the night's work. They had been efficient and professional, eliminating a threat with minimal collateral damage. But killing, even justified killing, left marks on the sole that never fully healed. By noon, they had reached Lisa's ranch. The cabin looked exactly as she had left it, peaceful and undisturbed in the morning sunlight. It was hard to believe that less than a week ago, she had been a simple widow trying to train horses and live quietly. Now she was Elizabeth Kane again, whether she wanted to be or not. Victoria, Janet, and Jessica prepared to leave that afternoon. They had their own lives to return to, their own responsibilities in a territory where law and order remained fragile constructs. But before they departed, Victoria made an offer that Lisa had been expecting. "There is a position open in the Denver office," she said. "Federal marshal, full authority, decent pay. The territory needs people like us, people who understand what it takes to bring order to chaos." Lisa considered the offer while she watched thunder grazing in the distance. The stallion had been returned that morning. None the worse for his temporary exile. He represented everything she had built in this valley, the peaceful life she had tried to create after leaving her badge behind. But she also knew that peace was an illusion when evil men could threaten it at will. Jose Smith was dead, but there would be others like him. Men who saw opportunity in the lawless spaces between civilization and wilderness. Men who would prey on the innocent unless someone stood against them. "I need time to think," Lisa said finally. Victoria nodded. "The offer stands. When you are ready, send word." After her friends departed, Lisa sat on her porch and watched the sun set over her valley. The events of the past week had changed everything, forcing her to confront the truth she had been avoiding for 5 years. Elizabeth Kane was not dead, had never been dead. She had simply been sleeping, waiting for the moment when justice demanded her return. The question now was whether Lisa Mitchell could coexist with Elizabeth Kane, or if choosing one identity meant abandoning the other. She had found happiness in this valley, peace in the simple routine of caring for horses and maintaining her small ranch. But she had also found satisfaction in bringing Jose Smith to justice, in protecting the innocent from those who would harm them. Perhaps the answer was not to choose between her two selves, but to integrate them into something new. A woman who could gentle horses and hunt killers, who could find peace without abandoning the skills that made peace possible. Thunder approached the fence and nickered softly, his dark eyes reflecting the last light of day. Lisa rose from her chair and walked to the corral, running her hand along his neck as she had done countless times before. Tomorrow she would write to Victoria and accept the position in Denver. But tonight, she was simply a woman standing in her own valley, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The past and present had finally found their balance, and Elizabeth Kane was home. 6 months later, Lisa Mitchell rode into the town of Silver Creek wearing a federal marshal's badge on her coat and leading a string of 3 horses. The horses were not for sale. They were evidence in a rustling case that had stretched across 4 counties and involved some of the most prominent ranchers in the territory. The town was typical of the region, a collection of wooden buildings clustered around a main street that turned to mud with every rain. But Silver Creek had a problem that set it apart from other frontier settlements. For the past year, horses had been disappearing from ranches throughout the area, stolen by a gang that seemed to know exactly which animals to take and when to take them. Local law enforcement had proven ineffective, either through incompetence or corruption. The territorial governor had finally requested federal intervention, and Lisa had volunteered for the assignment. Her reputation as both a marshal and a horse expert made her the logical choice for the investigation. She tied her horses in front of the sheriff's office and pushed through the door without knocking. The man behind the desk looked up from a newspaper, his expression shifting from boredom to wariness when he saw her badge. "Sheriff Brennan," Lisa said. "I am Marshal Mitchell. I believe you were expecting me." The sheriff was a large man with the soft look of someone who had spent too many years behind a desk instead of in the saddle. His badge was polished to a bright shine, but his gun belt showed little sign of use. "Yes, ma'am," he said, rising from his chair. "Though I have to say we were expecting someone else. No offense, but horse rustling is dangerous work. Maybe the territorial office made a mistake." Lisa smiled, but the expression held no warmth. "No mistake, Sheriff. I have been hunting horse thieves longer than you have been wearing that badge. Now, I would like to see your files on the recent thefts." Sheriff Brennan hesitated, then pulled a thin folder from his desk drawer. The files were sparse, containing little more than basic descriptions of the stolen animals and vague witness statements. It was clear that the investigation had been perfunctory at best. "This is everything?" Lisa asked, flipping through the inadequate reports. "Well, yes, ma'am. Horse theft is not exactly uncommon in these parts. Hard to track down the culprits when they can be 3 states away before anyone notices the animals are missing." Lisa studied the sheriff's face, reading the subtle signs of deception she had learned to recognize during her years as a federal agent. He was lying, or at least concealing important information. The question was whether he was simply incompetent or actively involved in the thefts. "I will need to interview the victims personally," she said, "starting with the most recent theft. That would be the Morrison Ranch, about 10 miles south of here. But I should warn you, old Morrison is not exactly friendly to law enforcement. He thinks we should have solved this already." Lisa gathered the files and headed for the door. "I am sure he will be more cooperative with someone who actually intends to investigate his case." She spent the rest of the day visiting the affected ranches, interviewing victims, and examining the scenes of the thefts. A pattern began to emerge, one that the local sheriff had either missed or chosen to ignore. The thieves were not taking horses randomly. They were selecting specific animals with valuable bloodlines or unique training. More importantly, they seemed to know exactly which horses to target and when the ranches would be most vulnerable. Someone with inside knowledge was providing information to the gang, someone who had access to detailed information about the local horse breeding operations. By evening, Lisa had a list of suspects and a plan for catching them in the act. The next major horse sale was scheduled for the following week in the neighboring town of Cedar Falls. If the pattern held, the thieves would strike again before then, trying to acquire fresh stock for the auction. Lisa made camp outside of town, preferring the solitude of the open range to the questionable hospitality of the local hotel. She picketed her horses near a small stream and built a modest fire for cooking her evening meal. The familiar routine of trail life brought back memories of her years as a traveling marshal, when home was wherever she happened to make camp. As she sat by the fire, cleaning her rifle and planning the next day's work, Lisa reflected on the changes in her life since the confrontation with Jose Smith. She had kept the ranch in the valley, but it was no longer her primary residence. Instead, it served as a retreat between assignments, a place where she could remember what she was fighting to protect. The integration of her two identities had proven easier than expected. Lisa Mitchell's knowledge of horses complemented Marshall Kane's investigative skills, creating a combination that was uniquely effective in cases involving livestock theft and related crimes. She had developed a reputation throughout the territories as someone who could solve cases that baffled other law enforcement officers. But success came at a price. The peaceful life she had built with Samuel was gone, replaced by the constant travel and danger that came with federal service. She had chosen duty over comfort, justice over security, and some days she wondered if the trade had been worth it. A sound in the darkness brought her back to the present, horses approaching at a walk, trying to move quietly through the night. Lisa doused her fire and moved away from the dying embers, her rifle ready as she took cover behind a fallen log. 3 riders emerged from the shadows, their faces hidden beneath wide-brimmed hats. They approached her camp cautiously, weapons drawn but not yet aimed in her direction. Lisa waited until they were close enough to ensure accurate shots, then called out from her concealment, "That is far enough, gentlemen. State your business or ride on." The lead rider reined up, his horse dancing nervously in the moonlight. "We heard there was a federal marshal camped out here. Thought we might have a word." "You found her," Lisa replied. "Now what do you want?" The man's hand drifted toward his gun, a movement Lisa tracked through her rifle sights. "Just wanted to let you know that your investigation is not welcome in these parts. Might be healthier if you moved on to other business." Lisa's shot took his hat clean off his head, the bullet passing close enough to part his hair. The man's horse reared in terror, nearly unseating its rider as the report echoed across the range. "That was a warning," Lisa called out. "The next one will not miss. Now ride away while you still can." The 3 men wheeled their horses and galloped into the darkness, leaving Lisa alone with her thoughts and the certain knowledge that she was on the right trail. Someone was worried enough about her investigation to send threats in the night, which meant she was getting close to the truth. Tomorrow she would begin the final phase of her investigation, and this time she intended to catch the horse thieves in the act. The trap was set at the Riverside Ranch, the largest horse breeding operation in the county and the most likely target for the next theft. Lisa had convinced the owner, a gruff old rancher named Tom Riverside, to cooperate by allowing her to use his property as bait for the thieves. The plan was simple but effective. Word had been spread through carefully chosen channels that Riverside had acquired a prize stallion worth several $1,000s, a horse that would be irresistible to thieves looking for valuable stock. In reality, the stallion was Thunder, temporarily borrowed from Lisa's own ranch for the operation. Lisa positioned herself in the hayloft of the main barn, with clear sight lines to the corral where Thunder waited. She had been in position since midnight, watching and waiting for the thieves to make their move. Experience had taught her that patience was the hunter's greatest weapon, more valuable than speed or firepower. At 3 in the morning, her vigilance was rewarded. 4 riders approached from the east, moving with the careful precision of men who had done this many times before. They dismounted near the corral and began examining the horses, clearly looking for the valuable stallion they had heard about. Lisa watched through her rifle scope as the thieves went about their work. They were professionals, equipped with proper ropes and bridles, moving with the quiet efficiency of experienced horsemen. But they had made one critical error. They had assumed that a single federal marshal would be easy to eliminate or intimidate. The leader of the group was a tall man with a distinctive limp, someone Lisa recognized from the wanted posters in her saddlebags. Jake Morrison, wanted for horse theft in 3 territories, with a reputation for violence against anyone who interfered with his operations. The other 3 were unknown to her, but their movements marked them as experienced criminals. Morrison approached Thunder's stall, clearly impressed by the stallion's bloodlines and condition. He spoke quietly to his companions, pointing out the horse's valuable characteristics and estimating its worth on the black market. They were so focused on their prize that they failed to notice the federal marshal watching them from above. Lisa waited until all 4 men were inside the corral before making her move. She called out from her concealment, her voice carrying the authority of federal law. "Jake Morrison, and you and your men are under arrest for horse theft. Drop your weapons and surrender peacefully." The response was immediate and violent. Morrison drew his pistol and fired toward the sound of her voice, his shot splintering the wooden beams near her position. His companions scattered, seeking cover behind the fence posts and water troughs. Lisa's rifle spoke twice in rapid succession, precise shots that dropped 2 of the thieves before they could find adequate cover. Morrison and his remaining companion returned fire, but they were shooting blind at a target they could not see clearly. From her elevated position, Lisa had every advantage. She could see the entire corral, track the movement of the surviving thieves, and choose her shots with careful precision. Morrison was good, but he was fighting an opponent who controlled the tactical situation completely. The remaining thief broke from cover and ran toward the horses, trying to escape in the confusion. Lisa's shot took him in the leg, dropping him to the ground with a cry of pain. Morrison found himself alone, pinned down by accurate fire from an opponent he could not locate. "Give up, Morrison," Lisa called out. "Your men are down and you have nowhere to go." Morrison's response was another wild shot toward her position, followed by a desperate attempt to reach the horses himself. But Lisa had anticipated the move, and her shot caught him center mass as he broke from cover. He stumbled and fell, his pistol flying from nerveless fingers. Lisa descended from the loft and approached the fallen thieves with her rifle ready. Morrison was still alive but badly wounded, his breathing shallow and labored. The other 3 were either dead or unconscious, their horse-stealing careers permanently ended. As she secured the wounded prisoners and waited for the local sheriff to arrive, Lisa reflected on the satisfaction that came from a job well done. The horse theft ring was broken, the stolen animals would be returned to their rightful owners, and justice had been served through competence rather than luck. But more importantly, she had found her place in the world. She was no longer Elizabeth Kane, the legendary marshal, or Lisa Mitchell, the grieving widow. She was something new, a woman who could integrate both identities into a life of purpose and meaning. The sun rose over the Riverside Ranch as Sheriff Brennan finally arrived with a wagon for the prisoners. He looked surprised to find the situation already resolved, the thieves captured and the evidence secured. "How did you know they would come here tonight?" he asked. Lisa smiled as she helped load the wounded prisoners into the wagon. "Because I understand horses, Sheriff, and I understand the kind of men who steal them." She mounted her horse and prepared to escort the prisoners back to town, where they would await trial for their crimes. Thunder nickered softly from his stall, recognizing his owner despite the badge she wore and the gun she carried. In the distance, the mountains rose like ancient sentinels, their peaks touched with the first light of dawn. Lisa Mitchell, federal marshal, rode toward town with her prisoners in tow, carrying justice to a land that desperately needed it. She had found her balance at last, and she was home.